Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Working It Out podcast. I'm here today with the CEO of Play England, Eugene Minogue. Welcome to the Working Out community, Eugene.
Oh, thanks for having me. Much appreciated.
No worries at all. So we're going to jump straight into the first question as I do, and we've got a Working It Out locker. So what we ask is that one person from each one of our guests induct one item into our locker. We've had some crazy ones in the past, and I'm really excited to hear what you've got.
What, to put something in the locker?
Yes, please.
Such as physical item, something
Yeah,
to
to do
do?
with your relationship with physical activity. Sorry. So in the past, we've had things like current CEO Tim Hollingsworth has put in his rowing machine, but I just released one recently with Joe Pavey, and she did her compression socks. And another example, Virginia Anderson, one that will be released just before this one, she did a handkerchief that she has to bring out on every single one of her runs.
Yeah, mine sat on my desk, my trusty AirPods. So
AirPods,
I don't go
lovely.
anywhere without those, particularly when I'm walking. So I do an awful lot of walking. So catch up on the podcasts and audiobooks
Mhm.
keeps me distracted whilst I'm out on my walking.
That's amazing. So is that your main source of activity then? Do you like getting out walking and chucking their headphones in, etc.?
Yeah, pretty much. I do HIIT training, so I do that most days. But yeah, definitely walking is my main activity. I usually do somewhere between 6 and 12 miles a day. So get out sometimes with a dog, most of the time on my own, just to switch off, compartmentalize the day, catch up on news, but also just to listen to books as well, because I don't get as much time to read unless I'm on holiday. So yeah, listening to audiobooks is a nice way to switch off whilst getting my steps in.
Amazing. So what I do is I normally like to try and dig into my guests, see what I can find through LinkedIn or X, or whatever platforms I can find. And it's really interesting because I go onto X and then I'll go onto media and scroll right through, right to the beginning to see what people do. And it does look like you're outdoors all the time with your family. Is that a regular thing that you like to do with your family as well?
Yeah, we're a pretty active family. So the youngest, she's a high performing gymnast as well, but she's also got a hidden disability. She's got a rare metabolic disease. So juggling the two can be challenging. Middle child, he's 14 now, but does life saving. So does that a couple of times a week. Bit of cricket when the season's on and stuff. Yeah. And then the eldest, sort of not so sporty, if we like, much more academic. She's off to university later this month as well. But yeah, a lot
Amazing.
of time we're out walking, doing things as a family, and we've got a dog as well. So it keeps us all busy and active doing stuff. But yeah, very, very active individually, but also collectively as a family. We like to do family walks, enjoy time outdoors. And we're fortunate enough to live in the Derbyshire countryside. So we've got a great country park very close to our home. So we enjoy that quite a lot as well as doing active stuff on holidays when we get some time together.
Going back to your item, your AirPods, and you say you like to listen to books. What kind of books are you into? Because is it more academic, or is this something to help you escape the world of academia and work?
It's a bit of both. I'm not really into fiction, to be honest. For me, a lot of the stuff is stuff that's related to work. So I read a lot around children's play and activities, around active travel is something that's very close to my heart with that. And then things in and around that as well, quite a bit around the changing digital landscape, the impact that's having on children and young people as well. And then audiobooks, it's mainly reference sort of stuff at the moment. So I'm listening to Atomic Habits at the moment, and I've got Mo Goddat's Unstressable next on the list. Yeah, listening to all sorts really. And then podcasts, I'm a bit into my politics. I'm a bit of a politic geek, having worked
Nice.
in local government all of my career. I do keep my ear close to the ground on that. So some of the sort of high level sort of stuff with things like the rest is politics, electoral dysfunction, but then also some of the more nerdier sort of stuff, if you like, the LGC sort of podcast, and also the truth about local government as well. And then others in and around the sport and physical activity sort of sector, conveners podcast and stuff like that as well, obviously play their way and working it out. So, yeah.
Oh, amazing little plug there. Thank you. Yeah. And Play Their Way, if you haven't listened yet, it was my full-time day job at Sport England up until recently moving into the Skelcan team. So if you haven't listened to that podcast, Eugene's on there. Give that one a listen. It's amazing. It also talks further into play. We're going to cover it today, of course, but we link it more specifically to the Play Their Way campaign. So the part which I picked up on is because it heavily links to your relationship with activity. You said around active travel. I've got a few punch words from my research. It was like runner, parkour enthusiast. I don't think even that does it justice. So, in terms of your relationship with parkour, can you give people the history of it?
Oh, blimey, where to start? Yeah, the short, abridged version is basically I saw parkour on TV many moons ago on Channel 4. There was two seminal documentaries, Jump London, Jump Britain. It really inspired me as a sports development officer at the time. And it allows me to challenge an awful lot of conventions around that, particularly the no ball games culture. And it allowed me to articulate some of the frustrations, but also the restrictions that young people grow up under these days, whether it's no ball games or you need a place to be active, pitch, a court, a wicket, a track and field. That wasn't how I grew up. How I grew up, I could freely play outside, I could ride my BMX, we could play football in the street and the other bits. Next thing, no ball game signs and other bits were coming up. So when I saw parkour, it sort of, one for a better phrase, allowed me to stick two fingers up to the establishment and go, I don't need a place, I just need a pair of trainers and my imagination. And that's where the battle began with that around perceived health and safety, insurance, risk assessments, all of this sort of stuff. So then we developed a documentary at the time when I was working at Westminster City Council, showcasing the actual benefits of parkour and what parkour actually was, as opposed to the spectacle of parkour, which was on Jump London and Jump Britain. So you had some of the founders jumping across iconic landmarks across Britain and London, really. And that was, when you get to that very point, that was the elite end of parkour. But underlying parkour was a very deep philosophy, practice, and understanding around your connection as a human being to your environment. And really, that's what we wanted to showcase. So we created a documentary called Jump Westminster, which dispelled all the myths around parkour. And really, it was around reminding not just adults, but particularly children, you've got an obligation to play. We all instinctively run, jump, climb, crawl, swing as children. But unfortunately, society got to the point where it was like, get down from there, that's dangerous, no ball game signs, you need to go to a sports club and you need a qualified coach and other bits. And parkour really got back to not just what childhood was about, but really articulating the importance of physical literacy, people to interact and be part of the environment, really. Yeah, it was a long old slog, 10 years there, taking it all through that process, establishing the national governing body, so Parkour UK, the long fight for recognition, which we got in the end. And then when we did get it, we had an encroachment issue from the International Gymnastics Federation, who all of a sudden wanted to claim parkour. So I had to set up the International Federation and fend that off and make sure that the integrity and authenticity of parkour was protected, really. And it was around challenging some norms within the sports space, really. What is a governing body? Why is it a membership model? Why was participation going down in traditional sports? And I argued for a long time participation in sport and physical activity was not going down. People were just doing things in different ways. Parkour was one element of that. And for many years, skateboarding wasn't even recognised in the UK. And there was an awful lot of urban sports coming through, slacklining, the type of run clubs that were being set up. Run Them Crew's a prime example. What Spartan Fan was doing with calisthenics back in 2012 and others. People were just doing things in different ways, in different social models, because it was grown up with social media at the time. So there was a huge change at the time, but the sporting bodies took a long time to even understand, let alone recognise that. So it was a tough journey, but I learned a lot, and I hope the contribution that I made will last a significant period of time, certainly outlive me and my reputation on X or Google or whatever you can find online now.
I think, unfortunately, I think it will outlive you in the nicest way possible, and I hope it will. It's so exciting, and the part which there's so many words there which I'm pulling out in terms of the next part around the emotions you'll use to describe your relationship with physical activity, because I've got after listening to things around like connection to environment, like an obligation to play. That if in terms of when it comes to physical activities for you, what emotions, one word comes to mind?
Well, physical activity and sport are fundamentally different things for me. With that, same with exercise, they conjure up different emotions and understandings of what we do. I think for a long time there was a rigidness, particularly around sport, and a misunderstanding of what physical activity was. And arguably, the way that we've constructed the world, particularly over the last 30 to 40 years, has marginalised not just physical activity, but play. And there's been a direct sort of impact in terms of children and young people who have got physical and mental health problems. But also, as you've seen with things like the Olympic movement, is now recognizing there's different ways of doing stuff, whether it's bringing three on three basketball. That was a street game or a street version of a very traditional game that was introduced. The same with breaking, parkour's no different, ninja courses or obstacle course racing, whatever you want to call it, calisthenics. These are all new ways of people moving. Some of these are due to the restrictions that we grew up, and we spoke about parkour. So children and young people frustrated because they had to go to a place to do something, whereas certainly my generation, we had much more freedom to play and be physically active. Climbing trees, as an example, a basic rite of passage for children, is all but lost nowadays. And that's something that we need to get back to. And also the misperceptions around risk, that we must eliminate risk. We must manage risk, but the only way you can manage it is to engage with it and understand that there is benefits in risk as well. And these are important to children and young people, but also people's understanding around physical activity and movement. There's a quote that I often use, and I'm probably going to misquote it. It's an old Churchillian quote, which is, the farther you look back, the farther forwards you can see. And what I mean by that is a lot of the stuff that we're trying to get back to as a society, we had. So people used to walk a lot more. It was natural physical activity that people would do as part of their day. You didn't have to structure it in with it all. Going to the shops or carrying your shopping to and from the shops with it all. We don't have those things anymore. We've made life so convenient that we've compartmentalized and over-sportized, in my view, a lot of stuff, particularly for children and young people. And I think we do need to change that. We need to make some fundamentally different decisions than we have over many years. And we're certainly seeing that in the active travel sort of sector around challenging some of the inherent dominance of the car and our planning systems around how we design and build the urban environment, how that's focused on vehicle movement and not people movement in terms of that. And arguably, if you look back, certainly pre-80s, the environment was much more conducive to human movement with that. And you look at what the Victorians done around or what's now referred to as a luxurious public realm with it all. The benches that they put in, the lampposts, the parks and open spaces that they built, and the highways was built around people and movement people, really. So I think there's some lessons for us to learn, but at the same time, a lot of the answers are already there. And we need to just be brave and be bold with what we do and be open to new ways of embracing stuff. Some of the stuff that I spoke about with parkour and why parkour came around was to do with the restrictions that young people are growing up. But equally, we're in a new digital age now, and digital isn't necessarily a prohibitive sort of factor to physical activity. And one of the things that I always harp on around is phygital activity, where digital can enable the physical activity. And we saw that through COVID, really, how it can transform some stuff. So I think we need to lean into that. But at the same time, we need to get back some of the basics to what we used to have societally.
I've made a lot of notes there. And what I try to do with my guests is get them to narrow down to kind of one word that describes their emotion in terms of how their long-term relationship with physical activity. And I've got a few things noted down here. I like the idea of just the word phygital activity is one that I'm going to steal from yourself. So thank you for that, because that's incredible. I've also got around bravery, rigidness. In terms of how you feel your personal relationship with physical activity, what one word would you use?
I think for me, it's a relationship. There's different points in my life where I've absolutely detested exercise or sport or other bits and pieces, and physical activity to a certain extent. I find an awful lot of joy in it, relaxation, particularly for my mental health, but also my physical health. So it allows me to switch off and compartmentalize stuff. But also it's you need to shape new habits around stuff. And I think a lot of that is around what we do as a society, how society is built. I find it incredibly frustrating walking around places now because I spot things, both because of my work and also because I'm an avid sort of walker and I choose that as my default mode of transport. So it's frustrating when you see roadwork signs on the pavement in the pedestrian. We're taking even more space away from people and giving more space to cars and vehicles. Small things like that really frustrate you. And then you understand why subconsciously people have stopped moving or stopped natural physical activity, because we're designing it out all the time, or we squeeze it to the margins with it all. And that's us as adults. That's before you even view the world through the lens of a child. And then it can be quite scary. There's a really good course run by the London School of Economics called Urban 95, and it's around how you see the world through the average height of a 3-year-old. And it's terrifying. In the middle of a city and trucks trundling past and the noise and just the city landscape, it can be. And those habits are formed very early. And these are things that we need to consider, particularly for our future generations.
Again, a few bits there which I'm going to dig into in the second half in terms of around how we're going to tackle inactivity and how you would map it. The last part of this section is around your earliest memory. You've just said there around how children and their view of the world. What was physical activity like for you growing up? What was it? Do you have searching back, do you have an early memory, like your earliest memory?
Yeah, well, there's two vivid ones for me. I suppose the earliest one for me, so I'm an 80s baby, so it gives you a bit of context. And I was fortunate enough to be one of the last, or our generation, the last to play out quite freely compared to our current generations of children. My mum used to say, right, off you go, don't come back till the street lights are on. And we'd go out and play and the other bits and pieces. And I remember that the most vivid memory for me was getting my rally burner and my BMX. And that transformed my free range of movement. So I went from how far I could walk with my friends or stuff that you was prepared to carry to exploring different communities, spaces and places, going down a canal, going to the graveyard, going to different housing estates. It was just transformative. And it was also a social cue as well, how you knew where people were. There was a pile of bikes outside somebody's house. That's where you knew where your mates were in terms of that. And then customizing that and doing all the bits and then doing things that nowadays you probably be frowned upon, but setting up ramps in the street and going onto car parks and garages and doing jumps and tricks and other bits and pieces. And that is contextual to what you was growing up. But that bike was transformative for me as a young person. It really opened my eyes to the world and the community around me and encouraged me to do and facilitated me to do more. I remember after the summer, after I got the bike for my birthday, I ended up cycling to school independently, which was great, really. I didn't even have to lock it up. I just brought the bike and put it in the bike rack at school and it was fine. And that lasted all the way through to secondary school and really instilled in me the ability to be able to travel independently. At 11, I was going to a secondary school 2 boroughs away, walking part way and then getting a bus the other end of the journey.
Mm-hmm. I resonate with quite a lot of that, to be fair. That was I share some of the same memories, and it's really interesting doing this series of those who no ball games comes up all the time, of saying that we just don't live in that world anymore. And I do just crept into the 90s, but just on the wrong side of that. But I had the same relationship, but you knew where your friends were because all the bikes were outside. You played football in the street, you did all those things. And I remember you've got like great memories of the first time I was allowed to cycle from our road and leave our road and be able to go to Richmond Park in London. It was like that was huge, and Richmond Park was the world to us. It was a huge moment in our lives. And then we started allowed to be cycling, like you say, like cycling to school, using your scooter, all that kind of thing. So yeah, it really has changed because even now it just doesn't feel safe to do.
Yeah, and this goes back to how we as adults design and build, prioritize our public realm around the vehicle. It's a very oversimplistic sort of explanation of that. When new housing developments are done, they're more concerned, can they get a refuse collection vehicle in and out of an estate than if there's space for children and young people to play and be active. That's fundamentally wrong. It's something that we've got to change. Certainly when I was growing up, we was lucky if we had a car in the extended family, let alone in a household. Now you've got 2 or 3. The amount of space that was taken over is huge with that. I'm not anti-car by any stretch of the imagination, but there needs to be a redressing of that balance of prioritization of people, really. And if we get the public realm, often people will naturally move and travel in a way that is more physically active, which is far better for them and for us as a society as well.
Yeah, you're jogging so many memories for me because it was during the school holidays, my road was a lot quieter, and the only car that would go down there was the ice cream van. And that was a great moment as well. We'd all be running down the middle of the road following it. So that's a great, jogging a lot of great memories for me. Okay, we're now starting to transition into the second half, which is around mapping and activity. But before we do that, I feel like we've got to know you a bit better now. But if you could provide an overview of your role, your organisation, and its obvious link to physical activity, please.
Yeah, at Play England at the moment. So we are the national charity that sort of advocates for the child's right and freedom to play with that in all settings. Obviously, active play is a huge part of that, but it's not the only element of play. There's the cultural aspects, there's the arts, there's the intrinsic value of play itself. And we know how vital play is for children and young people, and we need to protect that with that. A lot of people don't know that the UK is a signatory to the UN CRC, or the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child. Unfortunately, hasn't been enshrined in domestic law. It has in Scotland recently this year, but not yet in England. So this would be something we'd be absolutely keen. But that, if people haven't seen the UNCRC, I'd encourage people to go read it, particularly but not exclusively Article 31, which is around the child's right to play, leisure and recreation, really, and that's a fundamental right of the child, really. But a lot of stuff that we do policy-wise is around advocating for changes in legislation, and one of the things that we're calling for at the moment is for the introduction of play sufficiency legislation to make sure children, young people and families have sufficient time, space, opportunities, spaces and places to play freely in various sort of different settings. And to give you a sort of an anecdote on that, there is only one reference to children within the National Planning Policy Framework. And also by contrast, there's statutory protections within the National Planning Policy Framework for bats and newts, but we don't have any protections for children. Also, as a direct example for those that are working in sport and physical activity, there are protections within the National Planning Policy Framework to make sure we have enough athletics tracks, football pitches, tennis courts, cricket wickets, leisure centres, pools and sports halls are all protected in that. And Sport England are the statutory consultee that makes sure that we have those provisions in place across various sort of local authorities in England. Unfortunately, there's no statutory protections or requirements for children's playgrounds, skate parks, multi-use games areas, but also more broadly, baking children's play into the wider fabric of the urban landscape as well. So roads and streets, making sure children and young people have got time and space and opportunity to play on their doorstep. And then there's wider sort of elements as well that we campaign for or we work on as well. So workforce, making sure there's sufficient play provision. Unfortunately, we're losing adventure playgrounds all over England at the moment. They're vitally important, not just for children and young people, but for our communities as well. And making sure we've got the right workforce out there to deliver play and play provision with that. And again, to give you another direct example, certainly when I was growing up as a kid, you'd go off to a play scheme over the summer or the holiday times, or when you finish up school, you'd go into a play club. Now, things like that is dominated by sport. The sportisation has crept in there. Now, this isn't an either or, it's an and. So play needs to come back into that mix. So that it's part of the school day, it's part of the community sort of fabric life, and making sure it's part of wider schemes as well, governmental schemes like the holiday activities and food programme as well. So these are things that we campaign for. There's lots of stuff on our website, so I encourage people to go and have a look, particularly at our 2024 manifesto as well.
So when I post this, what I'll do is, if everyone heads over to LinkedIn, I always tag in the organisation and share some links to how you can access more information. So I'll do that there. We're now flowing into, and we covered quite a bit in terms of policy. So for yourself, if this is, we're starting to talk around, I'm building a map of tackling inactivity based on our sector leaders like yourselves, your personal opinions. And of course, your organisation and your experiences are going to influence your thinking. So I'm interested to know from yourself initially, if you were going to map out the causes of inactivity, where would you start? Where does your head initially go? You have a blank page.
Oh, the causes. Oh, God. They're many and multifaceted. I think a lot of it is to do with how we've built the urban, not just the urban environment, but certainly our planning system, for me, is first and foremost front and centre with that as well. So we need to tackle planning reforms to make sure that inactivity is in there. So as an example, Active Travel England was only set up 2 and a bit years ago. It's recently received statutory consultee status in a similar fashion to what Sport England's had for many years. Their statutory consultee status only kicks in at developments of certain sizes. Like I've outlined earlier, we don't have any protections in there for children and young people and the built environment, particularly their opportunities and spaces and places to play. So I think a lot of it is to do with the public, not just the public realm, because the public realm then informs our societal norms. And this was one of the big things that I was challenging at parkour. People said to me, "What's your goal with parkour?" And I said, "I want to make it a social norm." And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, "If you're walking down a high street and someone jogs past you or someone cycles past you, you don't even blink. You don't even notice it most of the time because it's an inherent social norm. It's a normal activity for people to do." However, in the early days of parkour, if someone was doing that in and around your line of sight, it would polarize people. So people either show intrigue or people go, "No, that's dangerous. That's illegal. You shouldn't be doing that." And if I articulate play, that's where we've got to with play, unfortunately, whereby we view it that it is this activity that children shouldn't be doing or should only be doing in a place, i.e. a playground. And we need to re-socially norm play, physical activity, and prioritize those activities and those movements to make sure that we can facilitate, enable, and support and permit those activities. It's still farcical that in this day and age we have no ball game signs being put up all over. Those signs have no legal status whatsoever. Basically, what they say is no children, no activity here. Then we struggle to understand why children and young people don't want to play or participate in sport or physical activity because it's been socially ingrained in them from a very early stage that you're not welcome here. You shouldn't be doing that. And these are things that we need to fundamentally address and challenge. Plus, we've lost an awful lot of facilities that we used to. Certainly me, as a kid, I used to enjoy going out to Ruislip Lido. That was a day out for me in terms of doing that. We don't have Lidos or outdoor splash pads or swim pools, certainly in the way that the facilities that we do build now for children and young people are not challenging enough, stimulating enough for children in the current context and what we do. There's some issues that we need to address around inclusivity and accessibility. That is getting better, but there's still a long way to go, particularly when it comes to those with disabilities, both physical disabilities, but also hidden disabilities as well. I've got two children with hidden disabilities, so I know that from a personal lived perspective as well. But also inclusivity as well. We're not doing enough for young women and girls around play spaces to make sure that they meet the needs of those girls and women, and making sure that we design those from their perspective as opposed to the default teenage boy perspective. So we've got lots to do on that front, but I think working with wider sector partners, but more importantly, we've got to change the societal norms around play, physical activity, leisure, sport, exercise, whatever you want to call it, really. So there's a long way for us to go, but in terms of the sort of causes of it all, we've done this. We've built the system in this way, and part of that, I'm one of the adults. I might be one of the disruptors in the system, and it's incumbent on all of us to do more, do better, challenge conventional thinking, and really challenge that. I was watching a great documentary. It's only a short one, 20 minutes, called Carspiracy, which talks about the dominance of the car and how that's changed our urban environment as well. So it really brings these things home and front and center and articulates a lot of things that I've been advocating for many years with various sort of hats on.
So what I try to do, which is very unfair, I've been told that a lot, because I think it gives it an interesting twist to try to narrow people down to what one thing would you focus on, would you focus your energy on? And I know obviously you're talking play, but we've covered planning systems and how play should be involved in the protection of CYP, children and young people. I always do that. I shouldn't have just abbreviate for the sake of it. Children and young people in our planning systems. We've also spoke about re-socializing and reprioritizing play everywhere. And then another point around a loss of facility. So there's a few really interesting points which all are going to be added to the map. But you've also said around we need more disruptors in the system. Is disruptors in the system how you see those things being achieved, or do you need more people like Eugene to be out there speaking, and what one of those things would you prioritize, or would you spend your time focusing on?
Yeah, do we need more disruptors? Yes, absolutely. There's a quote, I don't know who it was by, but if everybody's thinking the same, then nobody's thinking with that. And then us as a sector, we're guilty of talking a good game, but not doing a good game. A lot of the time, one of my big frustrations, I've been working in this for well over 30 years now. Can we just get on and do something? I've been running the No Ball Games campaign, KNOW Ball Games, for 13, 14 years since 2011. Can we just get those signs taken down? We just need a piece of legislation. They shouldn't even be up anyway in the first place. But this comes back to political leadership. We need some real bold, common sense leadership just to get the basics done. But these small shifts would have a huge impact societally. And I think that's it. If I could distill it down to one thing, I think we need government, and this is going to sound strange, government to go permit people to do stuff. And we had that during lockdown. It was the first time ever in my lifetime you had governmental officials, albeit the language wasn't great, go and do your daily exercise. It was the first time ever you had a coherent, consistent message. Go do this. Go do something for your health, and not just for you, but for others as well. So we need that political leadership, and that permission bit is key to be able to do it. And whether that's through the planning system, whether it's the big things of changing the national planning policy framework, introducing place efficiency legislation, or whether it's a small thing of getting those no ball game signs taken down, it needs to be, it's not an either or, it's an and. We need to do as much and as little as we can all of the time and challenge that conventional thinking with it all. And arguably young people have got a lot of the answers, but we just don't ask them. And when we don't really value what they say.
I think with that bit, and the part that's come up previously is around a fragmented relationship. I'm just looking at my other screen where I've got my map, and a fragmented relationship across government, whether that be DCMS, DFE, DFH, whoever it may be, and then that's causing a potential issue in terms of people's relationship with physical activity, because different priorities, different ways of working, and where does play, physical activity, movement, sport, where does that fit into wider agendas? And it seems like here you're saying the same thing. Like there's not one way to fix this. We need to somehow, from a policy level, from a government level, have play and activity ingrained within everything.
Yeah, absolutely. The irony was I was having conversations with colleagues in Denmark the week before last, and they said to me, "Oh, it's really interesting what you're doing around place efficiency and calling for legislation." And they said, "Oh, maybe it's something we should look at." And I said, "Why?" And they said, "Sure, do we not need it?" I said, "You probably don't." I said, "Because societally and politically, you're light years ahead of where we are. The whole ethos of play and physical activity is baked into their culture. It's there, therefore they don't need it." I've said on other podcasts as well, me calling or Play England calling for place efficiency legislation is damning in its own right. It's damning to where we've got to societally, but also shameful that we're asking for legislation to protect the child's right to play. That surely in itself is a reflection of how far we've come down the rabbit holes as a society. We shouldn't need legislation. Culturally, this should be part of who we are as a society. And a lot of countries have got that, but don't realise they've got it. Will legislation help with that? Yes, it will. But ultimately, legislation is the bare minimum. That's something you have to do, not what you should do. And that's where people should go out. I'll give you a prime example. Leeds City Council are doing some sterling work on place efficiency legislation. There's no legislation for it in England, but they've gone and done it because they've chosen to. Politically, it's got huge support there, but more importantly, they know it is the right thing to do for the children and young people in the city of Leeds. And they've chosen to do it. And there's other local authorities that are doing similar type work in and around that. Sandwell, Luton, doing some good work. Cambridge have just done a review of their play facilities as well. So they're doing that. But in the absence of legislation, minimum standards, people to meet and then build out from, that's where we're at. We're going to have this hit and miss sort of situation. We need to get out of our silos in terms of what we're doing. And for me, I think we need to sort of work hand in glove with various different partners and people who have different perspectives to what we do. And I think that's where the richness could come in. And also, I think we need to do more and listen more to children and young people.
So that's a really interesting piece, and we're trying to do that across the work I'm involved in at Sport England in a number of different projects now. And it did actually amaze me before starting at Sport England that there was no kind of youth voice infrastructure even within Sport England itself, but it was something that we advocated, organisations in the sector did. So I'm really glad we're doing that now. So how can organisations start implementing the young person's voice within their work?
Absolutely. I'd encourage people to go and look at the Lundy model. It's pretty straightforward, gives you some real practical advice of how you can do that in a meaningful way. Often what we do is, as adults, is we trivialize children and young people as opposed to genuinely listen to them. They are people, and more importantly, they're our future generations. So we should listen to them. They're the ones that are going to be in our position in a generation's time. So we need to listen to our future generations and importantly, act on what they're telling us.
I think we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for joining me today, Eugene. I hope you enjoyed the conversation. And if you've enjoyed
Always.
this as well and have any thoughts, if you agree with what Eugene has said, yeah, this is what we should focus on. I completely agree. Do comment on LinkedIn, let us know. Or if you disagree completely, say, no, we shouldn't focus on play. We should be focusing on X. We also want to hear, because I'm sure, as I say with all of our guests, I'm sure Eugene will be up for the debate.
Oh, absolutely. And I challenge anybody that disagrees with the statement that it all starts with play. You've only got to remember your own childhood and of how many memories have I jogged in you today through the conversation with that. And that's what we need to get back to. We must remember that we are former children with that. And we all had different experiences as growing up. But one key thread that cuts through all of that is play. As children, we all played.